welcome, President Meehan. We're so happy to have you here today for this project on the revitalization of Lowell in the 70s and 80s. So one of the first questions is, what was the city like in the 1970s and 80s?
I grew up on London Street in Lowell, and I had 4 sisters and 2 brothers, as well as my parents. We lived in a 4-bedroom house on London Street, 1 bathroom for 9 people. That was interesting. The city was in pretty tough shape at the time. I think that there wasn't the national park. There wasn't even a real vision of what Lowell could be, how we could take advantage of our history. There was more of I always got a sense when I was a young kid that people would talk about how, immigrants were abused working in the mills and the hours in the mills and all of that, rather than looking at it from the perspective that, and then the labor movement came, and then people got better wages, and, it was, the city didn't have a game plan. I think of, I was educated in Lowell public schools, and in a poor section of the city, when we got new books, they came from the Belvedere section. They were 3 years old when we got it. We used to have to take erasers and erase all the marks in the book.
Sorry, what neighborhood were you in? Because Lowell is known for its very defined neighborhood. So when we talk about Belvedere, people know that. Where was London Street?
It was in what's called Air City.
Okay.
So it's not it's not the Acre. My father had grown up in the Acre. My grandparents both immigrated from Ireland to the Acre, and that's where Irish and Greek immigrants settled. So my father was from the Acre. My mother was from a place called Swede Village, which was up by the cemeteries.
Right.
And we were kind of in between. The Air City is what it was called. But it was a poor section of the city, but we had a great family life, and a lot of us in the house, and we all attended public schools, including Lowell State College at the time.
But I did interrupt you about the books that you received. My
point is, we used to get new books, or actually old books. They were books that came from the Belvedere section, which was wealthier and had more political power, and that's unconstitutional, actually. And so I always carried with me that experience, and people might laugh it off as, oh, you got books that were 3 or 4 years old from another school, but it was unequal, it was unfair, and it was actually unconstitutional. So I carried that experience with me really throughout my career, throughout my life, and I tell that story a lot to demonstrate the importance of the Constitution, courts that have made rulings to make sure public education is equal as much as possible in this country. And I experienced on the other side of that,
right.
and it always made me sensitive to issues of equality.
Right. You also happened to mention that you attended so many different schools.
I did. I lived at 22 London Street my whole life, my whole K through 12 life, and I attended the Cardinal O'Connell School as in kindergarten, the Rogerson School, which is a 2-room schoolhouse on my street, which was great for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. We were transferred to the Shaughnessy School for 4th and 5th grade. They put us on a bus, and we went to the Pawtucket Memorial School for 6th grade. Then we were transferred to the Rogers School for 7th grade, and then in 8th grade, I graduated from the Butler School. So I think that also tells you that sometimes people have to make sure there's equality. I mean, that's just that would never happen if you grew up in Belvedere. You wouldn't attend schools like that.
Right.
When I was growing up in the 60s. That having been said, I survived, and a lot of the other folks that I went to school with did. But a lot of them didn't get the opportunities that I got. So I always keep that in mind. And it's one of the reasons that Lowell's a wonderful urban immigrant city, but sometimes we have to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to achieve whatever they set out to achieve in their lives. And we have to constantly be vigilant to that principle.
So, and then you stayed with Lowell for high school and then also for college. You went to Lowell State. So what drove you to go to Lowell State? And can you say something about your experience there? Because that also was a different place than it is now today.
Yeah, so I was very active in high school. I was a president of student government, president of my class as a freshman, and very engaged. I just get into Lowell State. I really did. Neither one of my parents graduated from college. My sisters had, and they went to Lowell State. So I only thought about going to Lowell State. But I had a great experience. I think I just got in there, to be candid with you, and a bell went off in my mind, and I thought, I have to apply myself. Otherwise, who knows what'll happen to me. So I did really well. I made the dean's list right away. There was a introduction to sociology teacher, Vinnie Moscow, who I had, and I just got really turned on with this whole issue of how unequal things were, how the tax laws were structured. And it's interesting because people ask me who my favorite teacher was, and I have a lot of people that I was very close with, faculty members who were still here when I came back to UMass Lowell, but the person that really turned me on was Vinnie Moscow, and he's in Toronto at a university, and I haven't called him yet, but I am going to call him and tell him that at some point. But it was a great experience,
Yeah.
I did well, I always thought that I'd go on to school afterwards. I majored in education, was able to pick up a minor in, a double major in political science. I almost got a minor in economics. When Lowell State and Lowell Tech merged, I felt the economics department was very, very good, and I took economics courses with Carol McDonough.
Okay.
But I left really prepared to take on the other challenges I was going to take on.
That's excellent. And so, and then when you left, what were your next steps?
I got a job. This is interesting. I was very active politically in campaigns, when I was a kid, when I was in high school, I'd go to meetings of the Lowell City Council and meetings of the school committee. The school committee part was related to I was the president of student government, so I had a role to
Right.
play. But I followed elections, and I followed all of it closely. There's a former mayor from Lowell who's, I think, 94, 95, Ahmed LeMay, and I saw him recently at the opening of the new Judicial Center, and he came up to me and said, "Marty, I remember you as a kid coming to city council meetings when I was the mayor." And I did, so I was very active and engaged politically. So
About what time frame was that, just so for the listeners?
in high school,
Yeah,
and it
then-
carried on in college,
Yeah.
but I applied, when I got to Lowell State, I applied myself
Yeah.
academically. My parents were shocked at how often I'd be at the library. And I just, a bell went, it's one of the reasons why this institution, UMass Lowell, is so important. A bell went off in my head, and I said, I'm going to get all A's, maybe a few B's, and I'm going to apply myself so I can,
Yeah.
move on from there. But to answer your question, Marie, I was a senior and got an opportunity to become the administrative assistant to the mayor of Lowell.
Okay.
And I hadn't even graduated yet, but I was able to, through the political science department, get practicum experience.
Right.
I took a psychology course, but I got credit and was able to graduate and still be the assistant to the mayor. And it was a great experience. I was, even though I was a young kid, I was well qualified. I knew a lot. I had attended city council meetings for, 8 years prior
Yeah.
to, so I
Yeah.
knew a lot about it.
Yeah.
And that opened up the door that I ended up getting hired by Jim Shannon, who became the congressman. And now I'm talking the 1978 election. And so Paul Tsongas decided to run for the Senate, opened up a congressional seat, and I ended up getting hired by the person who eventually won that seat,
Right.
which brought me right in the middle of the economic development and renaissance of Lowell.
Right. So I think, yes, let's just talk about that then. Like, now that you're with Shannon and Tsongas also is trying to earmark, some changes for Lowell, and eventually bringing in the national park. So please tell us more about your insider view on
Yeah,
what was
first of all,
going on.
the national park was the brainchild of Patrick Mogan. Pat Mogan was a city planner. He became a superintendent, and he was a great thinker. And and he came up with this concept. And even the congressman before Paul Tsongas, Brad Morse was
Yeah, Brad.
for years.
Right.
There was Paul Cronin 2 years, but Brad Morse sort of bought into this idea too. So this was an idea that was germinating, but Paul made it a reality. He was a good practical politician, and he believed in getting things done.
Yeah.
And so the national park was born, and it changed the vision of Lowell. It changed the history. History was something that we could all embrace. And then, there's a historic commission and rules for how buildings can be renovated and not renovated. And over a period of time, millions of dollars invested in rehabbing these
Right.
old mill buildings, and it changes Lowell. And now we have the National Park Service that we all can feel pride in. So that had a lot to do with changing the vision, but also the psyche of
Yeah.
people that lived in Lowell. It was a feeling like, hey, can you believe the national park we have a national park right here in Lowell, and it was
Right.
first urban national park of its time. It was very innovative. Pat Mogan was the brainchild of it, but
Yeah.
it changed Lowell a lot. And as a kid, I would go to fire. There'd be a big fire in a mill building, and you'd go, and when there was a fire, it was horrible. I mean, those buildings really burnt, and to see some of those buildings where he had fires now get renovated,
Right.
it was a wonderful thing.
So do you think? Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Do you think that you mentioned the change in the psyche? Do you think that's also then partly what helps some of these other entities in the city, businessmen, philanthropists, also then put their effort into the redevelopment?
Well, so we get a national park, and everyone sees the progress, and everyone feels good about it. And if you own a business in Lowell, and all of a sudden people coming in from outside of Lowell to learn the history, to be in the buildings, you're locating some of your companies in the building. I'm thinking Enterprise Bank and the
Right.
historic building that they're in. So there's a momentum that
Right.
forms. And it leads to other wins, and it leads to a feeling that if you want to be a public official in Lowell and represent Lowell, whether you're in the state legislature, the city council, or representing it in Congress, you're going to have an obligation to continue the momentum that's been made in Lowell. And I think that kind of caught fire with in terms of enthusiasm and working together. And one thing led to another. We were able to get Wayne to build the towers, which was a remarkable thing. And unemployment went down. The quality of we got Middlesex Community College downtown, which,
Right.
by the way, there was a legislator that I want to mention because a lot of people were involved in this, and some people we all think of Paul Tsongas because he led us in this for a long, long period of time and taught me a lot about what my responsibility was going to be as a member of Congress representing Lowell. But Paul Sheehy was a Lowell State grad. He went to law school, and he was a state representative. And he filed legislation creating Middlesex Community College in Bedford. And then he became a state senator years later. He also, by the way, proposed a merger of Lowell State and Lowell Tech. He would propose a doctorate program for what was then the University of Lowell. And he brought Middlesex Community College, working with Governor Dukakis, to downtown Lowell. And it was really a smart, innovative thing. I believe every urban area in the country should have a community college right in the downtown. If you think about it, an immigrant who comes to Lowell can actually get on a bus, go to Middlesex, and get there.
Right.
Get there. And if you do well at Middlesex, you can do anything from there.
Right.
You can graduate from there and get good grades and go to any private university. I mean, I can remember meeting with Bob Brown, the president of BU, a few years ago, and he said to me, Marty, we're going to be more aggressive in trying to get the students that you guys get at UMass because of the diversity of community college students, and those who do well can come to BU and do well.
Right.
So having a community college in the downtown, I think, was really genius, and Paul Sheehy did that, and I don't think people
Right.
would even know that or remember that.
It's good to know.
Yeah, I think, if you could build on that a little bit, because the focus of the project is how all these great business and civic philanthropic leaders came together. You knew them all. Were there some others that you wanted to call out and mention in addition to Paul Sheehy?
Well, somebody, more recently, Lowell has the Emerging Technologies and Innovation Center, the Saab Center, and Steve Pangiatakis was a state senator and got a big portion of the money for that. I would say that what Tsongas did, Paul Tsongas made a requirement that no matter what role you play, we got to work as a team. We're all going to work as a team, and everyone's going to get credit for whatever we accomplish. Because I was an aide to Jim Shannon, and I was in meetings where Paul would come into a meeting with city planners and state reps, and he'd use some really sharp language to get everyone's attention. But I could remember that he was the United States Senator then when he said blah 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 blah, and it's like, oh, I can't believe he said that, so he really got people organized. But also, I think of leaders like Dick Donahue. Dick Donahue was the chair of the board when this was the University of Lowell. Dick, he made a lot of money at Nike, and he was a distinguished lawyer, but he helped move this community, and he was smart and he was tough, and I always loved him because he was always direct and told the truth, and he made an enormous difference, getting the natural park going, supporting the university, and
the community foundation.
The community
Lowell
foundation
plan.
is another thing, and the Lowell plan. I mean, all of those things.
Yeah.
The Lowell plan was really important because it brought all the business and companies together. And in the 70s and the 80s and in the 90s, they were a powerful force, and you had to go to them to get support for things. And as a member of Congress, I would go to all the Lowell plan meetings, and that doesn't happen in most communities. A congressperson sends an aide to those meetings, but that's not the way it worked with the Lowell plan, the LDFC, and all those organizations. I worked on a UDAG grant so that the hotel could be built when I worked for Jim Shannon, and it was a $5 million grant, but it went into a revolving fund that the LDFC administered so that other companies could borrow money and put it back in. And there was a lot of economic development because of it. And it was smart, it was innovative. I look at the Greater Lowell Community Foundation. I established my own foundation when I left Congress with money that I had raised in politics, and I wanted to make it into a foundation to give to educational causes. I have recently put all that money in the Lowell Community Foundation because I believe in it. It does great work, and it makes that community foundation that much stronger because there's $4 million or so that helps them do what they do. But a lot of people contributed to that. I'll tell you one Dick Donahue story. So when I left Congress and became the chancellor at UMass Lowell, there were a lot of people that wondered whether or not I could do the job. And but once I got there, people said, "Yeah, he can." I mean, I can remember one of the heads of the faculty senate was at Doubting Thomas, and a year after I got here, he said, "This is great. Jackie's in this position. The provost is this. This is just great." And because he was critical of me publicly when I got the job, I would always say to him, "Bob, I need you to talk to the press and tell them I'm doing a good job because," and you could tell them you were Doubting Thomas.
Right.
So there were a couple of opportunities to run for the United States Senate that came up when I was here, and Dick Donahue and Nancy Donahue always supported me. And Nancy, Nancy was the type of person, if I had a tough issue coming up in Congress, I could go ask her and get her advice about what I ought to do, and it would be good advice. Or I could ask her, what schools my kids ought to go to, or how to raise a family. I mean, she's just an incredible resource. But I remember bumping into Dick Dunning. He said, Marty, now I've supported you in your career and all of that. You're not going to run for the Senate, are you? We need you here at UMass Lowell, and I don't think you should be running off. He's very direct about it. And I laughed, and I said, look, to be honest with you, Dick, I wouldn't have taken this job if I were going to walk away from it. I just wouldn't do it. Once I decided I was going to leave, I'm done with politics, and I'm not going to run. Well, you have all that money. I just want to make sure you don't. I said, no, I'm not running for the Senate. But I always loved Dick's candor. And you need someone to tell the truth when you're in a place. There's a lot of things that happen in Lowell that maybe aren't so great, and you need somebody to call it out. Songus would call it out as well, but Dick Dunning, who called it out, very, very direct. If somebody was going to get appointed to the UMass board or be chairman of the board that he didn't think had the credentials, he was straight out. No, you're not going to be the head of this board. You don't have a college degree. You can't be the head of this. You're just a very direct guy. And as he get older, he got even more direct, which I miss, and I think the city misses.
So you jumped ahead to you being appointed as chancellor, but if you could dial back 14 years in Congress, so many people in this community are so grateful for everything that you did while you were in Congress. So talk to us about what made you make that run. That was a courageous run.
Yeah, as I
people
said,
weren't thinking you could actually.
Oh no, they didn't think I could. Well,
so talk to us about that. Running for Congress.
Well, after I worked for Congressman Jim Shannon, I got my master's degree. I got a law degree, and I worked at the State House for a period of time, and then I was hired in the Secretary of State's office. I ran their Public Affairs division, but then I got an opportunity to run the State Securities and Corporations Division, which was a pretty good legal job after I graduated from law school in the Secretary of State's office. And I did that for 4 years. And because of the job I did there, when Tom Riley became district attorney, he asked me to lead his transition, and then he asked me to be first assistant district attorney. So I had first assistant district attorney was a really good legal job in Massachusetts. John Kerry had that job, and it led to him becoming lieutenant governor and then to the United States Senate. Another person who had that job was Tom Riley, for example. So there were a lot of people. So I was then in a position and to potentially run for office, and I always wanted to run for Congress. And I had watched local people who serve in the state legislature. Other than Paul Songus, most local people who served in the state legislature didn't get elected to Congress. I could name 10 people who didn't get elected to Congress who ran from Lowell. And part of the reason why they didn't get elected is because Lowell is a certain constituency base. But if you look at the district as a whole, it's much more liberal. You got to win in towns like Concord and Acton and Carlisle, and includes all of Greater Lawrence. So I studied congressional elections, and I knew I had never run for public office before, but I had a good idea of what I was doing. So I had tried a case in Superior Court, and Tom Riley had said, you can try cases, because I wanted that experience if I was going to go to the DA's office. And I was out of the office trying a case for 2 weeks, and he was kind of irritated because, I was first assistant to a lot of things that I had to do day in, day out. We have 15,000 criminal cases we're dealing with. So later on that night, he said, look, I'm sorry, I know I told you you could try a case, and there's a lot of stuff here, we need you to be doing this and doing that. And he said to me, I was with Paul Cronin, who's a former congressman, who beat John Kerry in the congressional seat in 1972. He said, I think that in redistricting, there's going to be a Merrimack Valley seat. And if your dream is to get elected to Congress, you got to plug into this because there's going to be redistricting. And I did. And I found out there was going to be a Merrimack Valley seat. And I went in, I talked to some people I knew, I just did my homework, and it was clear to me there was going to be a Merrimack Valley seat. I thought at the time the congressman from this district, Chet Atkins, who I had a good relationship, I thought he was going to end up, Concord being in a Worcester-based district. And there had been a lot of press about it. So I get into the race without even knowing what the district was going to be. And then Chet ends up in the same district as me. And I didn't think that was going to happen, but Chet was politically weak at the time. And it was difficult because I didn't disagree with Chet on very many issues. But he was in political trouble, and I came to the conclusion the Republican, Paul Cronin, again was running, would win. So I ran and I won the seat. You know, I never
You worked hard.
I did.
You worked hard at that.
I worked hard.
You had a great team. You organized a terrific
Yeah,
team.
I knew what I was doing.
You
But
did.
so when you get elected to Congress from Lowell, you have a responsibility to work on economic development, and so I worked hard at it. We got money for the Riverwalk, which now is a great asset for the university, and got money for all kinds of different things. But I stayed deeply involved. Paul Songus was still engaged and involved, and so you know he would he would always say, we got to get this, we got to get that, always working towards it. But it was a great thing about, and I tried to do those types of things in Lawrence that I represented, in Haverhill and Marlboro, but you didn't have the sort of the secret sauce that Lowell had. People would, when I was in Congress, people in Lawrence would say to me, why can't you get federal money for an arena in a baseball park the way Paul Songus got? And I said, well, actually it wasn't federal money, it was state money.
Yeah.
But there was a team effort, and same thing with the ballpark, it was state money. So, but I would say that there was a time when Lowell was going for special HUD designation for enterprise zones, and Lawrence was going for it too. So I brought Henry Cisneros in, who was the Secretary of HUD at the time. And we went to Lawrence, and many of the people getting up to speak in the presentation spoke Spanish. It was diverse. We came to Lowell, and candidly, there were a lot of white guys in the presentation. And some woman got up and she spoke Spanish the whole time, and I couldn't quite understand her. And she's speaking Spanish, and I'm watching, and I know it's not good for the presentation. And I leaned over to Henry Cisneros, who's fluent in Spanish, and I said, I can read body language, this isn't going too well. She says, no, she's criticizing the lack of diversity. And then he leans over, but she likes you. Lowell ended up getting the designation anyway, but so I think that Lowell is always a work in progress, and it never stops, and Lowell needs to keep working at it. And the assets that we had in the 70s and the 80s aren't necessarily here today. Example, Wang Labs, they're not here anymore. Raytheon isn't a local company anymore. They don't have their headquarters up the street anymore. The Lowell Sun isn't a family-owned newspaper anymore. Make no mistake about it, one of the genius things about Paul Songus was he knew in order to get things done, he had to have the newspaper on his side. Right. The newspaper's circulation in those days was 58, 59, 60,000. Everybody read the newspaper. And Paul pushed the pro-Lowell agenda through the newspaper. And the Costello family owned the paper. And when you have a family-owned newspaper, your name is on the masthead. It's important that you do the right thing. And so, things change, and the challenge in the future is going to be, we're not going to be able to use exactly the same playbook, I guess, is my point. I want to tell another story about Paul Songus that I rarely tell because it's a sad story. I was in Congress and getting seniority, moving up, and Paul was diagnosed with cancer again, and he was very sick. And I heard that people were going to see him, essentially say goodbye to him. And so I called Steve Jonkus, who had worked for Paul, and he also had worked for me. And I said, look, I got to go see Paul here. And he said, yeah, you should go see him. And he said, just call Nikki, this is the number, and go see him. And I went to see him, and he was dying. He was lying flat down on his bed, and I started small talk. And he said, Marty, we need the infrastructure money for the baseball park. It's not done yet. We have 2 grants that we haven't gotten, and you're going to have to get them. And I said, yeah, those 2 grants, so Paul, that's state money. And he looked at me, and his eyes were sunken, and I thought to myself, oh, if he could, he's thinking to himself, and if he could, he'd get up and slap me and say, but what he said was, Marty, I know the difference between state and federal money. I also know that you have a very good relationship with Governor Salucci, who lives in your district. I know that you can call him and help. And I said, I'm sorry, Paul, I will do that as soon as I leave. And he said to me, you're going to have more of a responsibility around here with me gone, and you're going to need to make sure that everybody keeps together and works hard. And you're going to have to do things like this, but there are a lot of other things you're going to have to do to keep it moving. And he said, I'm counting on you to do that. I said, I will. First call I make is going to be Governor Salucci. And I did. I called I was so moved by the fact that here Paul Songus is, and he's dying, and he's worried about getting the funding to finish the baseball park, and telling me I have a responsibility now. And I got Paul Salucci on the phone right away. He told me to come in and see the Secretary of Transportation at the time, who was Jim Karasiotis. And I called Brian Martin, who was the city manager. I said, let's go in and see Karasiotis. I think they're going to approve those 2 grants. And we went in, and it got done. And one of the things I said to the governor, I said, I want you to know, Governor, he's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I'm friendly with him, but I said, I just want you to know that when you approve these grants, we'll do a big announcement up in Lowell. The Lowell Sun will have it all on the front page, and you'll be there to take the credit. Oh, Marty, I don't mind giving you some credit. No, I'm just telling you, this is your deal, and you're going to get the credit for it. And that's the way things work. There was a practical aspect of it. Bill Weld, when he was governor, would get on the front page of the Lawrence Eagle Tribune because he'd go to Lawrence High School and dance the Macarena. Yeah. In Lowell, Weld had to bring money for a project in order to get on the front page of the newspaper. So I make that point because I know how things got done very specifically. I know how they get done, and the newspaper was a part of it.
That was a great story, and there's so much there. I wish we had all day to unpack it. But part of what you just talked about, this secret sauce, and what I just heard from you, from a number of people, which I do think is an important part of Lowell's playbook, if you will, is mentoring the next generation. And you just described so perfectly how Paul really encouraged, inspired Dick and Nancy Donahue, and you yourself have done that for so many. And so I'd love to spend some time on that, but I want to make sure we also get you've had a couple of other important roles since then.
Yeah, I will say on that, Jackie, that as much as I always could, I always like to, look, I worked well with the state legislative delegation. I can tell you that Steve Pangiatakis was 100% on board with the delivery system. And as traditionally the state legislature, I can remember Joe Tully in the Senate, Phil Shea in the Senate. They were all part of Paul Sheehy when he was in the Senate. It was expected, but Steve Pangiatakis became the chair of Senate Ways and Means. And so what I took from the conversation with Paul was use your leadership skills and use your position to make sure everyone's on the same page, and that's when it works best.
Yeah, it's a great message, and obviously inspired you to go on and do that. So I want to make sure that we do have a chance to talk about the next phase of your career. Bill Hogan decided he was stepping down after 25 years as chancellor. Obviously, as a congressman, you would work very closely with Bill Hogan and other members of the community. What made you decide to leave the Congress? A lot of people were worried when you left because you were doing so many great things for the community, but you decided to take on that role.
I did, and what happened to me was I was going to run, my plan was to run for the United States Senate, and when John Kerry lost to George W. Bush in 2000, I felt in my gut somewhat of a relief. And I thought to myself, I got to think about this. Do I really want to do this, or do I want to do something else? So I actually went to a company called New Directions in Boston. They work with CEOs of big companies who maybe lose their job or they're switching jobs. They help people figure what they should do next in their career. And it's a very high-end professional thing. They have staff psychologists that you take all kinds of tests. And they help you figure out what you should be doing next. So I did that, and it was an intensive 3-week program. And I sat down with the CEO at the end of it, and he said, Marty, there are 2 directions you need to really think about. One of them is you could run a professional sports league, the NFL or the NCAA, and then they tell you all the reasons why you'd be good at it, and all which made sense to me. And the other direction, they said, you should consider higher education. You have a passion for education. You feel it's how you got to be successful, and you would be a non-traditional leader of a college or university, and you can raise money. You have good leadership skills. You listen to people. You can share governance. You'd be good at that. And so I started thinking about both directions, and I put I was on the House Judiciary Committee, so I dealt with the professional sports leagues. I got to know Paul Tagliabue, the NFL commissioner, well, and Roger Goodell, and I really considered that. But I got on the board of trustees at Suffolk University, where I'd gotten a master's degree and a law degree. I was a ranking Democrat on the Research and Development Committee of the Armed Services Committee. Well, we authorized $2 billion worth of research dollars every year, most of it to universities.
Right.
So I then engaged in that. I went to visit universities, and I went to understand what the research was going to. And at that time, I helped UMass Lowell increase its research portfolio and what pockets of money they ought to be looking at. And I got to know Bill really well in that role. I got to know Julie Chen really well in that role. And so I'll tell you another thing I'd never tell anyone, but
And now you're telling everyone.
At Suffolk University, when I was on the board, was an opening for the dean of the law school, and Korn Ferry was handling the search. David Mead Fox, who was a lead higher education person for Korn Ferry, international firm, and so he called me as a trustee and said, I'd like to have lunch with you to talk about the law school dean. And I went and talked to him, and I said, well, this is what I think we need in a dean. This is a conversation going on for 25 minutes or so. And I started getting the feeling that he seems to be recruiting me for the dean's position. I said, I'm getting a feel. I thought you called me over here as a trustee to tell you what I think we needed in a law school dean. He said, well, you're that, and also you'd be a good candidate for the dean's position. And I said, well, I don't really think so, because I think we need an academic or a well-known federal judge, somebody who has that kind of prestige within the legal community. And I described what I think we need, and he said, look, Marty, I've done a lot of research on this, and I've talked to everyone at Suffolk. You can get this job. You would absolutely get this job if you're interested. I said, look, I don't think this is the right job for me, and my skill set is more in line with David Sargent's, who was the president at the time. And I said, I'm just not sure. We talked for another 40 minutes. By luck, total luck, UMass Lowell Search Committee hires a search firm. They hire Korn Ferry.
Yep. Yeah.
And the person who's going to head it for Korn Ferry is David Mead Fox. And I said to myself, I have to think about the Lowell job.
Yeah.
And I didn't really tell anyone. The press asked me, are you applying for the Lowell job? Very unsophisticated, because you don't apply for a university presence. If they think you want it, you'll never get it. And so I started doing my due diligence. I talked to people I knew at the university, and read a lot, got all of the information. They had a round of interviews for the job, and my name isn't even in it. And I was in Florida with my family Thanksgiving, and I got a call from David Mead Fox. He said, Marty, we've had a round of interviews, and we don't really like them so much, and I talked to them about you, and we'd like you to come in and for an interview. I said, you're going to have to give me a week or so, He said, yeah, that's fine, we can do that. And honestly, that's how it happened, and I prepared it. Preparation is everything in life, and you really need to prepare, whether you're going into a courtroom or whether you're going for an interview. And I prepared like crazy, but that's how it all happened. And that's a long answer, but that's how it happened. And it was this process I went through with a firm, helping folks figure out what a lot of CEOs who lose their job, because a life shelf of a CEO is 3-4 years, but they get a lot of money and they have golden parachutes so they can figure out what they want to do next. And this was a service that they used, and I used it, and that's how I thought I'll get into it. And so I get in the process. As you know, Jackie, they determine finalists, and I'm a sitting member of Congress representing 680,000 people. If I become a finalist, it becomes public. I have no idea whether I'm going to get the job. The president of the system at the time was Jack Wilson, and I had talked to Jack to ask him if he'd consider a non-traditional candidate. And he said, yeah, absolutely I would. But he wouldn't tell me he'd pick me.
Yeah.
It was only if the interview process went well that he'd pick me. And so I went to see Richard Freeland, former president at Northeastern University, who has written books on becoming president and all that, and I talked to him. He said, tell me why you want the job. And at the end of it, he said, Marty, go for the job. You're going to get it. I've heard you just go in and tell the search committee that, and tell the folks on the campus that. You should think of there'll be 2 academic candidates, but they won't have your knowledge of the institution. This is your home court advantage. You go in, and I did it just as he suggested. And by the time I finished my last interview that day, I had to go on a plane to go back to Washington. I wanted the job so I really, really wanted it.
That's amazing.
After that, I just got excited talking to faculty and all of that. So, and I didn't know it was going to be as successful as it was, but I hired good people. The first one I hired was Jackie to be the executive vice chancellor, and I enjoyed it a lot. And a lot of my other experiences in life actually prepared me for the job, and I hired good people, and
So
rest is history, I guess.
We still laugh about it to this day, how much fun it was. Just for the record, the university was in a very difficult, probably its lowest point in its history.
Financially.
Structural deficits, 5 years in a row. People were pretty discouraged, and there was not a lot of morale. I don't think you were there then as a faculty member, I think.
I had just arrived,
Okay.
right, like maybe 1 or 2 years before you came in.
But there hadn't been many faculty
Right.
hired. I mean,
Right.
so the whole place
Oh.
really needed a complete.
No, that's true. I was hired into a department where the next youngest person was at least 20 to 30 years older than me.
Yeah.
I remember
so
that.
We were not in a good place, just to say that, and just so exciting to watch you come in and light that fire, which you did.
There were advantages that I had that not everyone has. Bill Hogan was outstanding. He was building a research institution. It's why financially there were some issues because he wanted to make sure before he left that he had the faculty he wanted to grow the research enterprise. But he also didn't believe in borrowing money. And the Board of Trustees has an 8% debt limit where you're not supposed to have your debt payments be more than 8% of your overall budget, and Bill was at 2.5%. And so I got to UMass Lowell. I had the lowest interest rates in 40 years, and we were in a recession, so construction costs were really, really low. And I thought, this is an opportunity to really to grow this place. We've got to have a strategy to grow enrollment to pay for the things we're going to do. But I hired a provost from who was a provost at Northeastern, Ahmed Abdallah, who Jackie knew well, and he was near the end of his career, but he was very, very smart, and we just had a great team, and we all learned a lot working together. We had a fabulous team. I think of Joanne Yastrzemski for the A&F function, who was an alum, did a great job. But like anything, it's teamwork. It's hiring good people and getting a team together.
And sometimes, just to follow up on, you made the point of being an alum. You've spoken about this a number of times. that part of your passion came from being an alum, that
No.
you really wanted to see the best for UMass Lowell.
Yeah, and you know, it's sort of like coming from a school that got new books or old books from the wealthier part of town. You know, I got my education at this place, and one of the things that really drove me crazy when I got the job is that the place seemed dirty to me. I mean, and I had a meeting with all of we had a breakfast, and we brought in all of the people who were working in maintenance, and I said, look, this place is dirty. It's disrespectful to the people who come here. Many of you may send your kids here, or maybe your grandchildren to come here. This is a place that I got my opportunity to achieve what I want to achieve in my life. And you all are part of this team. It's an important part of the team. The place has to look good.
Yeah.
So that parents will send their kids here, so that kids feel respected and they know that they're doing something. And in the beginning, you know, I can remember we brought in Mr. Costello to help us
Yes,
with
we did.
with something, and he was tough. And there were some people who didn't want to play on the team. You know, I remember one of the heads of maintenance came in to see me, and he said, Marty, people are really upset in maintenance. Why? Because I want clean facilities. He said, no, when Joe Tully got us our jobs, they were supposed to be jobs for life. Now, Joe Tully was a state senator at the time. And I said, look, nobody gets a job for life. I don't get a job for life. You know,
That was the culture.
But that was the culture.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and you know, Bill didn't want the politicians playing in the academic side of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there are probably plenty of times but the maintenance side of it is just as important. And the buildings still, they never look better.
Right.
So I think changing the culture, yeah, that's a
The
good.
culture is what you did. And so Marty, you were talking, you know, you did bring such passion, and you did change the culture at UMass Lowell. And I think for me personally, just taught everyone how to reach a lot higher
Yeah.
than we thought we could. And among the things that you did was really, again, reinvigorate the connection with the city.
Yeah.
So back to looking
Yes.
at this
Yeah.
project, there were some major acquisitions in the
Right.
beginning, but it wasn't just those. It was creating those partnerships. You mentioned Steve Pangiotakis, Bernie Lynch. So tell us about, you know, some of those acquisitions. Maybe there was a little town gown tension or not. Or
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. Well, I always carried with me the lessons of Paul Tsongas, and there's nothing that actually. Bill Hogan played an important role working with Paul Tsongas in the construction of the ballpark and the construction of the arena. In fact, Bill never got as much credit, nor did the university get the credit. Neither one of those buildings would have been there. They just wouldn't have been constructed. The state wasn't providing money for those things, but they did it because we had a university. So I always carried that with me. And sometimes you have to, shake things up a little bit. One of them was I wanted to acquire the arena. I wanted to acquire the arena because the very first question I was asked when Jack Wilson interviewed me when I was applying when I was going to be a finalist, he said, "Well, what would you do with the hockey program?" Because the Board of Trustees wanted to eliminate Lowell's hockey program because they thought it would be better just to have one at Amherst, and Amherst should be the stronger one. And I'm looking at this guy and I'm saying to myself, oh, he's kind of a academic guy. He can't possibly like hockey, can he? And I said, well, look, Jack, I'm a lawyer. I'm trained to be able to argue both sides of an issue. What do you want to do with the hockey program?
Yeah.
He said, well, I think Lowell had one first. Well, let me tell you how I'd build a hockey program. and we went off. But as an example, I felt that the university should acquire the university should acquire the arena. And the arena was losing $1.3 million a year. I knew it was going to deteriorate. It was an asset that we needed for our hockey program, and I went about sort of putting that together, negotiating that with Bernie Lynch, and a lot of people didn't like it. I can remember I got a call from Nikki Tsongas, and she said, "I'm hearing around town that you're going to take Paul's name off of the building." I said, No, I'm not going to, and she is city congressman.
Right.
The notion that I'd take Paul Songs' name off the
Right.
building,
Right.
even if it wasn't my own personal connection to
Yeah.
Paul, the sitting congressperson was married to Paul. She has
Right.
the same name. So I said, well, let me send you over the drawing, the schemes of what we're going to do. What we're doing is we're changing the name of it. We're going to call it the Songus Center. And I said, well, we're also, what I'm going to do is put in the lobby something about Paul's career, because our students that are coming in, they hear Songus, they might know you, but they don't know Paul, and we're going to, and it turned out to be a great thing. We bought the downtown hotel. Now, the downtown hotel was owned by a family out of Rhode Island, and I did a lot of, I do research, and the place was failing. It had an occupancy rate of about 20%.
Wow.
Hotels need an occupancy rate of 68 to 70% to be able to work. And I hired someone to help do some research, and I found out that the chain that owned the hotel would bring in new furniture in the front door, but it would go out the back door. They were getting tax write-offs. They only had this hotel for tax purposes, and it was deteriorating quickly. We were growing quickly, and we needed beds, and we didn't have time to build residence halls. So, I wanted to buy the hotel, and I then started meeting with everyone I had, and a lot of people were critical of it because they said, "Oh no, we need to have a hotel." I knew the family the family who owned it. They were negotiating with a healthcare group that was going to put in, senior healthcare facility, and it was already failing as a hotel. So we made investments in it, and it helped get the university through a tough time. And at the end of the day, on both the arena and also the ICC, they turned out to be community assets. And so I tried to do that in most instances when we had a project, and we had a better relationship, I think, with the city. And if I were to look forward, and if I were to say, what I think city leaders should be thinking about, they should be thinking about doing everything they can to keep UMass Lowell here and vibrant here. And they also should work on keeping Middlesex Community College here and vibrant here. These are, the average enrollment at the community colleges in the state in the last 10 years, they're down 38%. So higher education is going to go through very difficult times. And the top two assets in Lowell are UMass Lowell and Middlesex Community College. It's the gateway for immigrants who come here to achieve their full potential, just like it was for me and my sisters and my brothers. So it's really, really important. So as I think about the future, I'm not so sure they can use the game plan that we use, because we don't have a family-owned newspaper. We don't have An Wang. Dick Dunny, who isn't here anymore. We have Enterprise Bank, but it's a big bank now, and
Right.
So and Raytheon isn't here. So the situation changes, and I think going forward, Lowell needs to make sure they do everything they can to keep those two incredible assets. That's what the people of Lowell are going to need in 25 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. And we're only stewards. We're on this earth for a short period of time. As we all know, and so it's important, I think, that the next generation understand those two assets are the most important.
No, I think you've really established that as chancellor, and I want to make sure you get in about becoming president. But before we do, just while you were a chancellor, we also acquired this building. You might want to talk a little bit about why you thought the Innovation Hub, the building that we're in today, was so important.
Well, Hamilton,
and where we are.
Hamilton Canal project was a priority of the city, and I think, look, I would battle with the city when they wanted us to make payment in lieu of taxes and all of these things, and we mixed it up. But I also felt we had an obligation, and Hamilton Canal was an important economic development project, and we were really the only thing here. We kind of got it going by coming in here. Now, the state government helped us. Governor Patrick gave us some assistance on that. I went to various secretaries of economic development, but this is an important innovation hub. It's an important asset. The lease, by the way, will be coming up, or is up on this building. So figuring out how to make it sort of work. A lot of people, as you know, Jackie, think that the University of Massachusetts Lowell is funded by the state. It's not. There's a subsidy that comes from the state of about 23% of the budget, but this is an enterprise that works through tuition and fees and research dollars. That's how we run the place. So, we need to get, we need to make smart decisions, and we need to think about what's going to happen to enrollment. But this building was another thing that we wanted to help get the Hamilton Canal going, and I think it has had a positive
Totally
impact.
has.
There's certainly a lot more here than there was.
Yeah.
The Judicial
Fantastic.
Center being here helps,
Yeah.
but it's another example of things a university can do to invest in a city that a little outside of the norm. It's off campus, but a good thing nonetheless. One other story I want to tell, I just thought of it, is when I got to Lowell, it was important that it looked like we were making progress. A lot of it's psychological too, and folks from the UMass Building Authority came to Washington. I had been appointed to the job, it hadn't started yet, and they said, we have this emerging technologies building, and we have a committee, and it's going to be built right over here, and it's like way over in Pawtucketville at the end of the parking garage on the North Campus. And I said, "Ooh, this is a first new academic building in 35 years. We're not going to put it there." And the guy's face got red. And what do you mean? I said, "We need to find a more visible place for it. And I want everyone. It needs to be a showcase. We need to." He said, "Well, we have a committee, and that's where the committee decided to put it." I said, "We're still going to have a committee. We're going to have a committee, but I'm going to talk to the committee and say we could locate it here, here, or here." And I gave them 3 options, and he said, "But this is a research building, and you can't have any. It has to be in the right spot."
Right.
I said, "You know how many research buildings I've been through in 14 years in Congress?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "A lot of them. I know a lot about how research buildings, what they need, and the reverberations and all of that. But I know that one of these sites will." And we located where we located it, which is right across. I knew the new bridge was going to be coming eventually over the river, and it's a showcase, and that everyone can see it. And as you guys know, not everyone from the university is in that building, but we have receptions here. It's a
It's
showcase.
beautiful.
I had a big lecture there Wednesday night.
Did
you?
We
Yeah.
had
It's
60 people.
iconic.
But
Yep.
It's
but
iconic.
it was figuring out,
Brilliant.
that. And then I wanted to acquire St. Joseph's Hospital, and I had, it had to be negotiated. And I had a tiff with somebody who worked there because I told them, "Don't show them we're interested in this. We need to get a better price." But University Crossing is a tremendous asset.
Yeah.
And I can remember Bernie Lynch, when we opened the bridge, he said, "Marty, everybody thinks you built the bridge." I said, "No, I just went down to the Department of Transportation and found out what it was going to be, and I knew we had to, both sides of the bridge, we had to do something big." And by the way, Bernie, I asked him to paint the bridge blue so it would look like a UMass Lowell bridge. But
And it turned out great.
Yeah, it did.
Really, it had such an impact on UMass Lowell. And again, just there's so many things we should and could talk about, but
Well,
I
I
want to
could-
make sure
I
we
could
can
come back
talk
and then-
about your
Oh, the
moving on
president,
to
okay.
Oh, yes, you did become president
yes,
of UMass System, and you carried a lot of the same philosophies, it seems to me anyway.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was in the job for, I'd say probably a year, and Rob Manning, the chairman of our board, who was a real advocate for me becoming president on more than one occasion. And he said, "How do you like being president?" I said, "Well, to be honest with you, I miss being directly involved with faculty and students. I miss teaching a course. This job is more political. It's dealing with the governor and the legislature and the government in Washington and research and the board of trustees. It's not as fun. It's more political." He said, "Yeah, that's why we hired you for the job."
We definitely wanted more time with you here in Lowell. You did such a great job.
It was one of the things was that I didn't want to work for another president, to be candid with you. I enjoyed being at Lowell. probably more than I enjoy being president of the system. But I just made a decision. I felt I could have more of an impact
Which you
as a
got.
system head,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel like working for another system head. I felt, I mean, I do have. You could make an argument that my skill set is actually better in the president's office because of the political skills that are required.
Yeah.
I'm the first president that actually was chancellor at one of the campuses.
Right.
I think that helps a lot too, and I think I understand what campuses are going through, and when we say you have to do this, you have to do that. I've been on a campus. I know what it's like to have the president's office say this or that. So I've enjoyed it. I'm at a point in time in my life. I'm trying to figure out what my exit strategy is going to be. My goal is to. When I was at Lowell teaching, I got tenure in the political science department. So I'd like to come back here at some point, particularly when I'm young enough and I have the same passion. I'd like to teach. I'd like to write. We have a Center for Public Opinion I'd like to get involved with, and a Center for Irish Partnerships that I think I could play a role in. So I'm planning, and I'll be back at some point.
Well, in my mind, you've never really left, and you're still very intimately involved.
Yeah, you're here
And we want to make sure we get in this question that we've asked all our interviewees. If you were to give advice to this next generation, like these students sitting with us today,
Yep.
doing the videotape, why is it important to get involved, and can you really make a difference?
I think you absolutely can. In fact, Lowell has changed its system of electing city councilors into districts. So there's no reason why anyone who wants to work hard can't get on the city council, can't get into city government. It's important because Lowell has such a distinguished history as an immigrant city that goes back, hundreds of years, really. It's a birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, and we need to keep it going, and we can never be complacent. And it's challenging. There are a lot of challenges with being an immigrant city, but I meet people from Lowell all over the world, and they're doing all kinds of great things.
Yeah.
And we need to be a city that can allow that to happen. My advice would be to get engaged, to get involved, to vote, and to speak up and speak out. And we have a group of young people who are younger members of the city council who are engaged and involved. So I think that's going to happen. But as I said earlier, I think the city needs to make sure it embraces Middlesex Community College and UMass Lowell, and not take for granted that two high-quality institutions are always going to be here. Now, I and you and the rest of us are doing everything we can to make sure UMass Lowell is as great as it can be, but there are challenges on the horizon. Demographically, just take demographics. The number of high school graduates in New England and the Northeast is going like this, and it's going to go like that. So there are going to be a lot of challenges to figure out, do we need to right size? Are we going to be able, how many students can we attract? All of those things. Can we, attract more students from outside of the United States, from outside of Massachusetts? We need to keep making the place more and more diverse, and we will do that notwithstanding the Supreme Court decision. There are plenty of things that we can work with to make sure that we continue to grow our diversity and to grow the university culturally. And we need to have everyone on board to do that. The other thing I'd say, you need to do the right thing. I can remember a local realtor, a guy named Ken Harkins. When I was running for Congress, he was kind of a family friend. He knew my uncle very well, and you got to raise money when you're running for the first time against an incumbent. It's a tough thing. And I remember going to see him and asked him if he could give the maxed out contribution to me, which was $1,000, which he said yes to. He said, on one condition, you've got a really good name that your parents have given you, and it's been free of any stain or anything like that. And politics is a tough business. I'm just going to ask you to, do the right thing, and don't get, don't ever not do the right thing. And it's actually good advice. You have to have a moral compass, and if you're going to get engaged and involved, you got to do the right thing. You can't do the wrong thing because of pressures, and inevitably there are pressures to do the wrong thing, but you got to do the right thing. And we're in a post-truth era where it seems that facts and science and the truth don't seem to matter as much. And I think the younger generation is going to have to fight that, because the truth does matter. Facts matter and science matters. And we're in a terrible era right now, not just in the United States, but around the world.
Yeah.
This is not something that's just in the United States. So I think the younger generation is also going to have to get back to facts, truth, and telling the truth. And sometimes it's uncomfortable. There are inconvenient truths, as Al Gore told us about climate change. And we need to get a hold of the facts and science and the truth and tell it as much as we can. And the younger generation is going to have to do that.
Well said.
And I'm afraid of the environment we have now. But education, you get an education, you learn what facts and science are all about. There's nothing that this generation can't accomplish.
Well said. Well said.
Yes, thank you.
Marie, do you have any
No,
final questions?
I think
or-
that's a great
It is.
way to end.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so
Enjoyed
much
it.
for being part of it, Marie.
Thank you. I
Yes.
enjoyed it.